ask any woman who thinks she's having a bad hair day and somebody gets in the elevator and says, I like your haircut. She's on cloud nine. The problem is she may not be able to believe them. And so one of the exercises that I've taught myself to do is that when other people say something like that to me, I choose to believe them. And so when I look at the perspectives that are coming at me from all these different people telling me, Andrea, you're not giving yourself enough credit. You're actually doing at night what I'm doing. Or Andrea, you're such a good mother. You're so wise. I'm like, well, heck yeah, it took me till 57 to get here.
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Andrea Johnson. Andrea empowers executives and founders to lead with authenticity, conviction, and confidence so they can make a positive impact on their lives, organizations, and communities. As an adoptive parent who grew up internationally, navigating mental and physical wellness, she learned that emotional resilience must be earned. The process of uncovering and understanding the significance of her core values became the key to the process that allows her clients to do the same. Andrea works with leaders who feel stifled and have grown unsatisfied with their current level of influence. She facilitates improved communication and corporate culture by working within teams. Her passion is equipping female leaders to define a new culture by trusting their own ability to think critically, create imaginatively, and lead effectively. Her personal story of overcoming childhood obesity, bulimia and depression, early menopause, gastric bypass surgery, and private adoption are all part of the journey leading to their personal growth lifestyle, intentional optimism. It provides a framework for how we do what we do. It's the attitudes and mindsets we employ and embody to live out our own values, goals, and dreams with excellence. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Andrea. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Hey, I am excited to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm excited too. It's going to be a great conversation, especially around something that I find really I'm passionate about, which is core values. So I'm looking forward to that part of the conversation. We're going to get into that. So many people have no idea what it is. They throw those words around and they're just totally clueless. And correct. The people that say they follow them, but yet don't follow them. It's, we have so many posers out there today, or what are they called? Gurus, those false gurus.
Yeah.
I know you're not one and I'm not one, so I look forward to that part of the conversation. So one of the things I start out with, though, is a person's origin story, as we talked about earlier. And the reason being, for those that are new to the show, that are watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform, really at the end of the day, we connect with people when we have something that we have in common with them. It might be the smallest little tidbit, but it's something that helps us feel like I'm not alone in this world. There is other people out there that have, these exciting or crazy things that go on in their lives. So I appreciate it if you could do me a favor and tell me your origin story and what key things from your childhood to adulthood that led you to where you're at currently.
Well, I agree that when we understand where somebody's coming from, a lot of times we can identify with them better. And the more times I tell my story, the more I realize it's a little unusual. And we think it's just normal until we start telling somebody. And you already gave a whole bunch of highlights. You gave all like the pinpoints of like the different things in my origin story that I can talk about and will talk about. And I'm usually an open book. And I find that being willing to do that helps other people. But one of the things that I do share in my little bio that you read there is that I grew up overseas. My dad was a pastor actually before I was born, and I don't really have memories of what it was like to be. I mean, I have a few memories of it being a small church pastor in Wyoming. We were in Riverton, but I do have a few memories of my dad of living in Fort Worth, Texas, where my parents were. My dad went to seminary there. That's where I actually, years later, met my husband. I actually went to seminary in the same place, met him in grad school. And I do have some memories of being a kid, but mostly my memories started in Wyoming and the trip overseas to Korea. I am one of those people who lived in, I think I moved 21 different times or by the time I was 21, or maybe it was 17 times by the time I was 21. And they included things like moving from the town where my parents were in college to the city where they were in seminary, to Riverton, Wyoming, to a place where my parents got trained to be missionaries, back to my dad's and my mom's hometown in Southeast Texas, where we waited until it was time to go overseas. And then I will not forget leaving for Korea in 1974. I was 7. It was May, and we're coming up on what is today. We're recording on May the 14th. On May the 18th in 1974, so 50 years ago. Oh, is that right? 40 years ago. Don't do math. I know you're a finance guy and you do numbers, so you can tell me how many years ago that was.
Well, at the end of the day,
It was
doesn't
50.
matter.
It was 50 years ago because I was 7. So I remember in an Eastern way, instead of the facts, I remember the story and the feelings and this little tiny airport in Southeast Texas. My grandparents were there. My mother's parents were angry that she was taking her kids all the way across the world to this country, South Korea, that still was kind of smoking, for a better term, smoldering from the armistice that was put in place, not actually finalized. I mean, we still don't have, I mean, that's why we have North Korea and South Korea. There's an armistice in place. The war has not officially ever ended. And so I remember what that was like. I remember the little suitcase that I carried. My mother was so smart. It was me and my sister. I was 7 and she was 3.5. And my mother was, I mean, it's a long trip. It's to travel from Texas all the way to Korea. We got to stop in Hawaii, which was nice. We stayed a couple of days there. But because it's a really long trip, my mother got these little suitcases, little carry-on suitcases, and she got enough she called them happies. My mother always did happies. They were something less than $10, but whenever I saw this and I thought of you, right? So this is the type of person she was. And so she wrapped individually these little things. And we had, of course, coloring books and crayons and all that kind of stuff in there to keep us busy. But each day we got to open a present. And I don't know who gave her this idea, but I will never forget it. And it made traveling, it was like each day I got a new present. So traveling all the way to Korea felt, as a 7-year-old, a little less daunting, though it was pretty daunting for a 7-year-old. My sister was so exhausted when we got to Kimpo Airport, which is now, you don't even fly into Kimpo Airport very much. You fly into Incheon. But we got there and my mom said, "Yay, we're here. We're at Kimpo Airport." And my sister burst into tears and she said, "I thought we were going to Korea. I thought this was the end, And it's just a long trip. And that experience of going overseas and living in a different culture around language that I'd never heard before, with completely opposite style of thinking. It's very Eastern, of course. We're very Western here in the United States. All of that was kind of the beginning of what I would just call a cognitive dissonance for me that created a lot of anxiety. I didn't feel safe. There were things that happened during the 70s. If you look back at the history of Korea, the peninsula during the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of scary things that happened. There was a hatcheting at the DMZ of American soldiers. There were tunnels that were being discovered, which I went in quite a few of them because as missionaries, they were like constantly working with like the military or something like that, just different government officials. They were, when we would go down to our beach on the West Coast, because it was facing China, I guess it's the Western China Sea or something. We couldn't go on the beach at night because they had barbed wire up and soldiers walking it with armed, live ammunition. We had not been in the country 2 months and watched a U.S. helicopter get shot down because it flew too close to the Blue House, which is their White House. It just tanks rolling down the street in the middle of the night because they had a curfew from 12 to 4. These kinds of things produced in me a need to feel safe. And by the time I was 10, 11, I was sneaking food. This is where, we talk in my bio, I talk about bulimia and depression. It's easy to keep that stuff under wraps, but my family had a proclivity for, or a unique ability to store energy on our bodies. And today they call that obesity, So my family, genetically, we had that ability. And so that was my safe thing. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't do drugs. It was safe to eat food, right? I was a missionary kid. I was a good girl. So throughout my childhood, that was one thing I did was I found ways to soothe myself, whatever fear or anxiety I had. I found ways to do that through food. And, looking back now, I'm thinking that poor scared little girl, and I can look back now with the work I do and I can see my top core values of belonging or authenticity were constantly being dishonored. And it's not that nobody was trying to do that. I just didn't know. I was so constantly under this fight or flight, that I just didn't know how to protect that. But I was also, on top of all of those things, what my mother called the definition of a strong-willed child. And I look back now and I say, well, at 2 years old, it showed up. My top core value is autonomy of thought. And so when you try to tell me how to think or how to do something or be like you or to fall in line, my initial reaction is nope. And when you're little and when you figure them out, on two ends of the spectrum, when you figure out how to actually live in harmony with and to honor your core values, because I don't think they change, and we'll get into that later. But when you're very young, you automatically honor them. And then other forces outside of you, either you happen to be in a good environment where they fit, or you figure out ways to cover them up, compromise, whatever, until you're no longer being like assaulted basically over your core values. And so for me, I learned how to follow the rules. I learned how to be the good girl. There were times it came out, especially as a teenager, that was not always a pretty situation. But, I just, I can look back now and I can see it all very clearly. But that lack of safety, and I don't even know that it was ever a real lack of safety. It was a perceived lack of safety. Was very instrumental in kind of putting me on the path that I was on. So that's the beginning of it all. And that usually causes people to ask a lot of questions. And just for one more piece of shock value. Korea is a very mountainous country. It's about 70% mountains. And we lived on a mountain in Seoul on the western side. And on top of the mountain was a gun garrison. And there would be plenty of times that this would happen. But the first few times we were outside playing. It was in the summertime. It was dark. And we heard these boom, 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 and saw beautiful fireworks, if you will. And my mother came running out to get us because my dad, of course, was down country somewhere. She came running out to get us, and we went to the very center of our home because we had no idea that those were 50 caliber chaser bullets, they're tracer bullets, excuse me. The ones that you can see that's how you know in the dark where you're shooting at before you had like the kind of technology that told you where you were shooting. And so it's those kinds of memories when you think something is fun and then it turns out to not be safe. those kinds of things produce stuff in you.
Well, yeah, well, everything that you went through, though, how does a child, as you mentioned, though, we can have addiction issues. You weren't into drugs, alcohol, obviously, you were a younger person, and food was comforting. But in today's society, you can fast forward to today and anywhere along your life, addictions are a real thing, and people turn to addictions. People are judgmental of others' addictions, but they don't realize why people have addictions. They don't sit in their thoughts and say, why does this person have this addiction? What is going on in their life? And when I coach people on the lifestyle portion of my business and I'm dealing with them in finance, we have conversations and I find out that they have these addictive personalities. You can see it with their budgets and how much money they spend on. It can be addicted to going to concerts, going out to eat. It can be alcohol. Sometimes it's all of it. Yeah. And you can see that, and you can and you start to analyze what they're telling you and ask those questions. How did this happen? And it always goes back to the childhood monsters that we have, similar to what you're talking about, that monster of you didn't feel safe, so food was comforting. Well, it was easily accessible too, wasn't it? Right?
Absolutely. We lived in these because these missionary homes were built in the 60s, back when they didn't have hotels for the missionaries to come and go. So if the missionaries needed to travel, we needed to have a place to stay. So they built bigger homes, and we had a big compound and had 6 homes and a small apartment building on it. So this house had 4 bedrooms and a big full basement with a garage, and very Western style. And upstairs, the bedrooms were all on one side of the house. The end bedroom covered the entire width of the house, but the rest of the other side of the house was all walk-in attic or pantry. And we took with us non-perishables. We took peanut butter, tuna fish, Vienna sausage, Spam, Jell-O, canned goods, all those kinds of things, because in 1974, Korea was not the amazing powerhouse they are today, and they didn't have that they didn't have that kind of thing in the grocery stores. It was like going back 30 or 40 years in the United States. Everything was in season, and when it was in season, you had to can it or freeze it. And so we had a big freezer. So you're right, it was accessible to me. And because here's the really odd thing. It was so safe for us to walk around. Like, the kids could walk down the street, no problem. We could get on the city bus and ride across the city of 11 million people, just the kids, never worry about a thing. I don't recall kidnappings, and I watch K-dramas every day. As a matter of fact, before we got on our call here, I was eating my lunch watching a K-drama, and I'm still amazed at how the children can travel around like that on their own. And part of that's their Eastern society mindset. It's very different from us. But we never worried about, it was this odd sense of safety being able to do that, being able to go across the city of 11 million people. And yet I still felt unsafe in other areas. And, what you say, people, their checkbooks or whatever their bank account tells you, they call it shopping therapy for a reason. And, it's like, I still figure out ways to soothe myself, because I ended up with gastric bypass 19 years ago. And it's been the best tool that's helped me stay healthy. And, but it also made me pay attention to what it was that caused me to get there. It made me literally look at where do I need to grow? What do I need to resolve? What is going on with me? How can I become a healthier person all the way around, rather than just physically? And so that kind of, all those things played a part in it. And, I think it's the amazing contrast between the safety and the not safety, the ability to just like do anything you wanted and yet still not be able to do certain things because I was overseas. And so it was just this constant battle of opposites for me, and not feeling resolved and not ever feeling like pieces never seemed to just fit in one puzzle. I felt like I always had like 3 or 4 puzzles I was working on, I guess is a good way to say it. And so as an adult, here I am trying to figure out how get rid of the puzzle pieces I don't need from those 3 or 4 puzzles and put the pieces together that make a picture now. And that's the work. that's kind of where I am now.
I like how you put about the puzzle though, because when we're looking at a puzzle, we're always analyzing the pieces to see where they fit. And the key thing there is we're always analyzing. And you had that moment in your life where you had that gastric bypass surgery and you said it changed your outlook on stuff. Congratulations though, because most people, they can have those aha moments or those light bulb moments, but they don't necessarily always engage or take action. They fall back into their addictive personalities, no matter what it is, from food to drugs, alcohol. It can be television, it can be sex, it can be so many different things, that because it's a distraction from the fact of the uncomfortableness of being in there. They don't want to go outside their comfort zone. They're not willing to take that risk. And I imagine it's the same for you. I know myself, when I've had those aha moments and I start to evolve and I'm constantly analyzing to stay in the grind and that climb and not get camped again, it's uncomfortable as hell. But if I ever stop, it's so easy to fall back. It's so easy to get back onto that wagon and be along with everybody else and not walking and actually taking action. That's what people, when I say get on the wagon, it's because you are not putting any effort in.
Yeah.
If you're walking, you're taking action.
Yeah, this last week was a very difficult week for me because I was confronted with an area in my life where I realized, I have gotten on the wagon, as you say. I got on the wagon there. Doggone it. And we like to think that if we're growing in one area, we're growing in every area. Well, if you're like me, and I have a son who's a freshman in high school, when I would concentrate on one particular class, the others would suffer. It's like the grades were never like all A's or all B's. It was like A, B, C, A, B, and because when we give attention to one area of our life, it is natural for us to not give as much attention to other areas. But I was confronted with that this last week, and I've been doing this a long time, right? I mean, I'm 57 and I've been doing a minimum of personal growth since I was 19. I put myself in the hospital for bulimia and depression then, and I turned 20 in the hospital for a 12-week program. And so that was the first time somebody actually taught me about mindfulness, taught me about what it means to actually, instead of just counting calories and trying to white knuckle it, what does it mean to actually love myself? What does it mean to love my body? What does it mean to eat in a way that makes me feel my body feel good rather than my emotions to feel good? The first time somebody actually taught me that it's okay for your emotions to come over you like a wave. And that's why we do things like meditation. And that's why we do things like yoga. And that was the first time anybody ever said it. So I've been doing this a long time, and it still came up like it. And they always come up and like slap you on the back of the head. I mean, it's like you never realize it. But I like to look at myself as climbing steps. And every time I climb up to a next level, it got easy on this level. So it was like, I'm hitting this wall or I have to go up. Right. And so I feel like this week, and I even said it to my coach friend, I said, I know this is what you would say to me, so I'm just going to say it myself. I've up leveled, or I'm up leveling, and therefore it's hard again. And I see that as a good thing. I see that as a thing that tells me I'm working on it. I'm growing. And, I don't always want to be like in the challenge. I don't want to always be on the struggle bus. I mean, that's no fun. It is fun when your plane actually takes off and you just fly. That's brilliant. But if we're not willing to do that hard stuff every so often, or at least to look at it and reflect on it, then you're right. We're not going to grow.
No, see, for me, I believe reflection has to happen every single day. Right from when I go to bed and I'm laying in bed. For those that aren't faith bearing in the sense of religion, I am. So when I go to bed at night and I pray, I also do a gratefulness exercise, but I also do a check-in exercise, like what happened today, right? And I never ever go to sleep saying I had a bad day. I haven't now going on 6 years. I coach on it. I have specific things I teach people to level up. Like you said, you constantly said somebody helped you. So for those listening or watching, it's not a weakness to have somebody coach you, mentor you, help you level up. It can maybe just be a good friend that listens. And then, as you said, you self-check yourself. Oh, I know what you're going to say. because just saying it out loud, our brain is a giant computer. Saying it out
Yeah.
loud is different than thinking it inside, right? So when we say things out loud, it changes different chemicals within inside of us. It gives us a grander sense of knowledge of ourselves to move forward, to push
Yeah.
forward. To have that somebody is not a bad thing. To get camped once in a while, that's a reality. It doesn't matter how
Yeah.
much I coach and how many people I've helped, even on the financial end of my life, I hit the struggle bus once in a while and I go, what? I teach and coach people this.
Yes.
And you give yourself that mental slap, like, hello,
Yeah.
wake up.
Yeah.
And how do I give myself that mental slap? I have that reflection at night. I wake up in the morning before I swing one leg out of bed. I'm already thinking, what am I grateful for? What's going on today? So tonight I'll go to bed and I will reflect about you. I'll reflect about the fact of having a fantastic podcast. What did I learn? What aha moment did I get out of it? And pat myself in the back for doing one more episode, for
Yeah.
investing that time,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes at the end of the day, that is one of our biggest weaknesses. We don't pat ourselves in the back. We don't give ourselves that what we need. We don't say, you're pretty good. You're real. Look what you've gone through.
You're
Look what
doggone
you
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
look, and it's people say, "Oh, you're self-absorbed, blah blah blah." You know what? You stay in that avenue of your life of being negative. I'll stay around positive, and that
Yes.
starts by loving me, so that I can love on my guests, love on my clients, my family, my grandkids, my now great granddaughter.
Oh,
Right?
yay.
Yeah. So I have 5 kids, right? A lot of people, you wouldn't probably know that. I have 5 kids, 4 daughters and a son. I have 5 grandkids. I have a great granddaughter that was born in 2023. And at the end of the day, I owe it to myself to be the best version of me so I can be the best version of myself for
Yeah.
everybody around me, right? So that I'm
Yep.
checked in. Because how many people do we talk to that we're checked out because we're thinking about all our problems and our challenges, and
Yeah.
we're sitting there and nodding, but we look into the eyes. You can talk to people. You look into their eyes, and you can tell they're checked out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I work every day, so I'm not checked out.
Well, I actually discovered a tool, and I don't know if you've discovered this one, but there is if you're not spiritual, you may not have heard of this. I am from the evangelical world, so I hadn't heard of this because it falls probably more on the liturgical side, but it's just the Lectio Divina. And there's an app called Lectio 365. And every night now, because I was doing like stretching and I was trying to think and I was trying to pray, but unlike you, my brain goes all over the place. And so it was very difficult for me to develop that habit, because that's what you had to do, right? You had to develop that habit of
Absolutely.
checking in with yourself and having a gratitude practice. And my brain doesn't, I'm not as efficient at that as you are. And let's put it that way.
I
So
developed it.
you developed it.
I didn't all of a sudden wake up, or
Right.
was born with it. I've worked hard on it to keep
Good.
myself
Well,
checked in.
and it shows, right? And so for me right now, I'm still trying to develop it. So I use this tool, and Lectio 365 is a free app, and it has a morning and an evening. And at night, I don't usually use the one in the morning as much. I don't need it. I'm a morning person, right? So it's much easier for me in the morning to wake up and say, oh, what are the great things that are going to happen today? And how am I going to show up in amazing ways? And who am I going to meet today? And I literally look at my calendar and say, who's on my calendar? Because I love meeting new people. But at night, nothing good happens after like 8 o'clock, right? It's just like, I'm done. I'm toast. It's when I have my worst meltdowns. It's when I have my most anxiety. It's when I have my worst worries. It's when I say something stupid to my 15-year-old. I mean, it's like, I've learned that's my defenses are just down. And so this little tool is like an 8-minute. They actually, you can read through it if you want, or they have 2 people who kind of trade off reading it. It includes prayers, and it includes like whatever the Lectio Divina reading is for the day. It's a New Testament and Old Testament, and then something from a church history person. And every night, get this, every single night, it says, you are the only place where I can lay down and sleep in safety. And so I had been using it for about 4 weeks, and it wasn't until about a week ago I recognized that phrase is in there every single day. And I realized, oh my goodness, that's one of the reasons that I am able to let go better, because I got somebody else. And now I say it with the app. Now I say it with the person reading. In you, I can lie down in safety, because that's the one thing that keeps coming up from my childhood, is that I didn't feel safe. And now here I am using this tool to develop a habit. Who knows, maybe one day I can do it by myself. But if that's my rhythm, and my rhythm is that I have the energy in the morning and not at night, then for me, using a tool like this helps me to power down and helps me to remind myself. And there's a piece in there that says, what blessing did you show me today? It's like that gratitude practice, and it gives you time. It's like almost a deep breathing thing. It just like give you a little time to think about it. It's a wonderful tool. If anybody's listening and says, oh, I can't do what Dwight does either, I couldn't. So I started with that app, and it actually has been very helpful, keeping me kind of in the process of developing this habit that you already have.
But you're still doing it on your own. You're not giving yourself enough credit. And here's what I mean by that. Those that are listening and watching, you still have to open the app up. You still have to activate it. You still have to internalize what's being said. You still had to have that epiphany of that phrase. Yes. So at the end of the day, we as a human, as a person on this planet, we tend to not give ourselves enough credit because of that lack of safety we grew up with. Myself, I grew up with a lack of safety. I had severe health issues, was bullied, didn't feel safe, went through so much trauma all the way up to high school. So I can understand that. And my brain is a lot like where you're saying you're at currently. Hamster wheel, constantly. It would never stop thinking, and it would drive me crazy. I never had good sleeps, right? I would wake up restless. I always had, and I found the more tight I got on the process of what I do when I go to bed, no matter how terrible the day is, if I check out wrong, meaning checking going to sleep, I literally have nightmares. I wake up with anxiety. I wake up with depression. And there's the odd time where, I'm just exhausted. I had a grandchild of mine stay over a few nights ago, and he wanted to sleep with grandpa. Okay, you sleep on this side of the bed. But I made the mistake of forgetting that he's a thrasher.
Yeah.
Well, he thrashes and does this and does that. And a few times, and I was anxious before I went to bed. Right? He's laying there. I'm laying there. He's already fallen asleep. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I hope William doesn't do this. So no matter what I did with my normal routine, which I still did, that was stuck in my brain. I couldn't drop it. So I kept on waking up constantly. Sometimes he wasn't even beside me and having to push him over, but I still woke up because I was nervous and anxious, and I didn't feel safe that he was going to be that right up beside me or kicking me or whatever. We do it to ourselves, right? We don't give ourselves enough credit. It's okay to use apps. It's okay to have mentors. I have people that are mentors of mine on all different aspects of my life. I've been involved in masterminds. And the nice thing about a mastermind, those that aren't familiar with them, if you're in a small mastermind, I like ones that are no more than 8 to 10 people.
Yes.
We help each other check in. What are you struggling with? And I might have advice, even though it's not my mastermind, that can help somebody else, or vice versa. So at the end of the day, it's okay to be on the struggle bus. What's not okay is not to move forward, is to stay beyond that hamster wheel. For those that are listening, I know you're not, or you wouldn't be listening. Those that know my show, you wouldn't be listening to my show if you wanted to live on the struggle bus or on the hamster wheel of life, because life has purpose, and purposeful living, which my book is about, is how to live life on purpose, not by accident, is all about the struggle does not have to stay real forever.
Yeah. I mean, I love this idea of, and I just did a podcast episode on it last week. The difference between a struggle and a challenge is one makes you better and one has purpose, and the other one bogs you down and lacks purpose. So it goes right along with what you're saying. It's like this whole idea of purpose.
Yeah, purposeful driven life. I wish when I was growing up, I would have had me, the person I am today. I wish I would have had that person on my shoulder, not the devil and angel, but my little me whispering in my ear saying, you know what, you're worthy. Those people's lives suck So they're trying to make themselves feel better by making you feel worse because they've only been taught how to feed off a negative, right? And
Yeah.
fear. They don't
Yeah.
understand that fear is an acronym for face, everything, and rise. It has nothing to do with anything else. It has to do with the fact that it was that word is designed to drive you to be a better person. You can be
Mm.
even at a 6, 7-year-old. I couldn't imagine if I would the things I know in the last, because I've been on the personal development train since 1993. So,
Mm.
it's been quite a while. I was in my early 20s, and I know how much it's changed me. And every time I divert away from it, right? Every time I forget to do the right things that keep me in check, I'm scrambled again.
Yeah.
So those listening and watching, especially those that are our listeners that have been listeners for the last 3 years, they know I talk about it. I'm going through this, but this is what I do to
Yep.
correct that, right? This
Yep.
is how I have to work at it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's okay to give yourself a mental slap, right? Not in a
Yeah.
harsh way, but
Well,
a
no.
reality check,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's helpful.
So you overcame, we're going to get a little bit more into this, childhood obesity, bulimia, depression, early menopause, gastric bypass surgery, and private adoption. Which of these created the most growth for you in your life? Or would you say they all played a role and some, though, were more significant than others?
Well, I'm going to say the second because the weight and the body image stuff, that was quite honestly, that was part of what hit me this last week. I'm 19 years out from gastric bypass surgery, and I still have yet to accept my body, and be comfortable and be proud or feel accomplished. And yet, I can work 5 hours out in my garden and move hostas and black-eyed Susans and dig up all day and do all these things and be very strong, even at 5'2" or 5'1.5", but for some reason I can't accept the shape of my body, right? It's like there's this thing and it's just I'm consistently trying to grow. And that was the thing that hit me this last week. But then it was also here in the United States was Mother's Day, right? So the idea of Mother's Day is very fraught for me because I had a challenging and I loved my mother dearly, but as a mother-daughter, that's always complicated. And then we lost her in 2017 to breast cancer. And then to find out that, I'm nearly 14 years into my marriage and I couldn't get pregnant. And then to find out that I was in early menopause. And, my mother had interesting and weird things happen. Like she had a ruptured ovary and then she had to have a hysterectomy when she was 36. So there's no way to know family history, whether or not she would have gone into menopause early. But by 38, I had a doctor sitting across the desk from me in a white coat saying, you have a 13% chance of a live birth with in vitro fertilization. And I just remember feeling like I'd been hit. And I thought, that's not a good chance because IVF is difficult. It is not easy. It is not benign, nothing. And I, by the time we got out to the car, I looked at my husband, I said, adoption's 100%. Right. So immediately my brain was kind of flipping over to this, but what's the new path? Right. It was like, and I think I had been prepared for that. I had 2 sets of 7 missionary kids my age. 2 of them were adopted and they both had siblings who were adopted. And my best friend was adopted. So I felt like I had been prepared. That was another piece that was prepared all my life for doing that process. But then the process of it itself, deciding if you're going to go international or domestic or work through the foster system or work with an adoptive agency. We ended up going private. And so I had to take every single birth mother call on an 800 number that rang to my cell phone. And I had to create a website. And so many things caused me to just becoming a mother was very difficult. And then when our son arrived, he was 9 weeks old. The birth father, we were in Maryland at the time, and the birth father objected. So we had to wait 365 days to get his rights terminated. I was terrified we were going to lose him. I was terrified I would not bond with him as a mother. There were just so many things. And so even today, he's 15 years old. Mother's Day still feels, there's a lot of feelings that go along with that. And every time I have big feelings, it's an indication to me that is an opportunity to work on something. It's an opportunity to, like you said, reflect. And I too do a weekly reflection, and I do a monthly reflection and a yearly reflection, but I do periodic reflections where I can look back and say, okay, I've had this opportunity to grow in this area before. What about it did I do well? And what about it did I not do well? Or what did I leave behind? Or what did I miss? And last year's Mother's Day was not quite as difficult for me as this year's Mother's Day. And I don't know if it's just because I have a 15-year-old in the house or what, but there was just a lot. So as far as any one of those things, I think they all did it in different ways. And, when we talk about perspectives, we like to talk about having perspectives from other people's perspectives. And one of the things I've learned personally that is so helpful is that other people's perspectives of me are way better than mine.
Isn't
And
that the truth?
oh my goodness. I mean, ask any woman who thinks she's having a bad hair day and somebody gets in the elevator and says, I like your haircut. She's on cloud nine. The problem is she may not be able to believe them. And so one of the exercises that I've taught myself to do is that when other people say something like that to me, I choose to believe them. And so when I look at the perspectives that are coming at me from all these different people telling me, Andrea, you're not giving yourself enough credit. You're actually doing at night what I'm doing. Or Andrea, you're such a good mother. You're so wise. I'm like, well, heck yeah, it took me till 57 to get here because I didn't get my son until I was 42. So, having people give me those perspectives is one of the pieces that I grab onto because of the things that I've learned. And so I think that all of those things also give me perspective to look at it from different angles.
It's amazing how God brings people into my life. And the reason I bring that up is our conversation and you talking about adoption and you talking about hysterectomy and stuff. I didn't deal with it firsthand, secondhand through both my sisters. Both my sisters, my oldest sister had to have a hysterectomy in her early 30s. She had major challenges. She went through, both my sisters went through in vitro. They both tried having kids. Both of them ended up adopting, and I lived the trauma with them. I didn't live the trauma personally, but I lived it still personally in the sense there's only three of us. I'm the youngest of the three, and both my sisters went through that, and the trauma and the heartache. And my one sister ended up losing one of the babies after a few months because there's a check and balance system where the people change their minds.
Yeah.
And the trauma.
I was afraid that was going to happen. Yeah.
Oh, the trauma my oldest sister went through, or having to have them have access, the birth parents have access for X amount of period of time, and hearing the heartache when all of a sudden one of the parents disconnected. And wondering, you know what I mean? And then I look at my two older nieces and my nephew that were all adopted, and the trauma of my sisters wondering, oh, are they going to blame me? Did I do something wrong? Is that why that person left? Because all of a sudden they wanted pictures for the first year, but now, or the first few years, because it was part of the process of private adoption that they could still have access. Then all of a sudden they fell off the planet. So there's so much emotional garbage that we put ourselves through that society has embraced on us, right? I look at the fact of, I wrote down here, you talked about your weight issue. We're going to bounce back to that. We have a fear. I know myself, I've changed and I lost weight, but I still had people after the fact, oh, good for you for doing that. That must have been hard. Or months later, oh, you still have the weight off. Aren't you special? And, you think it's sometimes those people, you love them, but you like to throat chop them. Like, do you think before you open your mouth and remove all doubt? I don't think so. Otherwise, you wouldn't say anything unless it was positive, right? So has that been part of the trauma that you deal with, is the comments from society, those close to you, in regards to your weight?
I don't anymore. And it's actually the opposite now. I'm 19 years out. So I've only been here in Virginia for 12 years. And so I came here and nobody knew me when I was heavy. So now when I tell them I had gastric bypass surgery and I show pictures, anybody that knows me as I am now, they're like, that's amazing because they already see me as a success story. So they're not like asking me like, are you going to be able to do it? Are you going to be able to do it? So I see a question on your face.
No, that's fine. Keep on going.
So I don't have that now, but just this last week, Oprah did on with Weight Watchers did a show on YouTube with a bunch of people on there regarding making the shift and changing the way we actually talk, the idea of diet culture. I mean, I personally had to do some deconstruction around patriarchy and white privilege and I mean all kinds of stuff. And so I realized that was part of it. Is I have diet culture in my head. I started Weight Watchers at 10. And so there was this constant thinking about it and wondering about it and never being enough and never adding up and always being afraid that somebody's going to judge me, whether they do or not, afraid that they're going to judge me. And then turning around, finding myself on the other side of the coin, judging people who won't have gastric bypass in order to actually lose the weight, or judging people who won't do something about their weight and complaining about their feet, or, and so it was a big wake-up call for me to be able to say, oh, evidently I have not actually worked through this stuff. I've just flipped over to another side that's easier to handle. And it's just a lot less emotion with that, right? So, but what you're talking about, yeah. And at the beginning, I had people say, well, it sure would be nice to take the easy way out.
Oh yeah,
just have
those
surgery.
people.
And I'm like, what do you think? They just went in and cut the fat off my body? This is not what happened. I have permanently changed plumbing. I mean, it's like completely different. It's like, I literally can't go to an emergency room without informing them that I've had gastric bypass surgery. Because if they tried to put something down, like an endoscopy or anything, they have to know or they would puncture. So, I mean, it's like, there's things that I haven't had a soda in 20 years. I watch my sugar. My husband was willing to change the way he ate for me in order to say, all right, well, we don't eat this food anymore and we don't eat that food anymore. And so now we do these kinds of things. But at first, yeah, I got a lot of, it would be nice to take the easy way out. And I'm like, your body being in starvation mode for 18 months is not the easy way, my friend. It just isn't. But it was a tool that I knew that if I put, just like Lectio Divina or Lectio 365 at night, I am big on tools. I love using tools because I know where I have strengths and where I don't. And so I am willing to augment with a tool, and I'm willing to augment with somebody else. And so for me, gastric bypass was a tool, but I've realized I need to continue with help, because when I did that, I worked with a counselor for 4 or 5 years. And when I was done, he looked at me and he said, I've never watched anybody do something so courageous. I'm like, really? And he's like, you just completely turned your life upside down. You completely changed the way you thought. You completely changed the way you acted. You were willing to confront your childhood stuff. This was big. I just want you to know, so that was 20 years ago, 19 years ago. But yeah, I think diet culture and the way body image culture, because body positivity was bothering me. I'm like, why is it okay to say a fat body is beautiful? I mean, I couldn't think that way because I had flipped over to the other side, because that's where normal people live, And so I had to confront that in myself this last week and say, oh my goodness, I haven't really grown in that area. I've just gotten into the majority of, it's like I've gotten into the easy side. And so we have to do it. We have to make sure that we confront it all.
Well, yeah. And that's the biggest thing about the monsters that we have in our lives, is constantly realizing that they're not what defines us. Unfortunately, we have a society through movies, TV, music, the media, friends, family, that are constantly saying or doing things that aren't indicative of climb. They're indicative of making us feel shame. Like the shame culture in our world today is terrible. Like that person making that comment on taking the easy way out, like, go walk away from me, leave. Like, just,
if I could have done it on my own, I would have. I mean,
and there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a weakness, though. It's a realization that by getting help on any aspects of our lives, as long as it's not morally apprehensive and hurting society, there's nothing wrong with it. It is giving up our weaknesses to enhance and become a strength through support. Good for us.
Well, And I do want to make it very clear that when I say I couldn't do it on my own, I don't, at the time, I thought it was because I didn't have the willpower. And I look back now and I realize I did have the willpower. And I was already doing research because I worked at Johns Hopkins in cancer research. I was an administrator and a research administrator. So I knew how to do the research on things. And I originally asked my insurance company for the gastric sleeve, and they said, no, we want you to do the Roux-en-Y, which is the gastric bypass. And I said, I need this surgery, please. I don't want that really drastic surgery. I want to do this. But in the process, I learned that, and this is what was kind of talked about on the YouTube special with Oprah last week, is that they are discovering that so much more is going on in our bodies when we hold on to weight, that only a certain percentage of the population actually has a body that is built to eat less, do more, and actually lose weight, right? Calories in versus calories out is actually a fallacy for some people. And I mean, I have friends who eat less calories than me and cannot lose weight. And it has to do with the biology of their body. And it has, like, our fat cells secrete hormones. Our pancreas, our pituitary, all those hormones that are secreted in our body actually make a difference. So when I say my family is genetically predisposed to store energy, my family has, if you want to use the word evolved, to the place where the people in my family genetically are really good at storing fat. And that means that it is much more difficult to overcome that with just the regular way that the people who are successful say, this is the way you do it. You eat less and you exercise more, or you eat this kind of food and you exercise more. Well, that works for certain bodies. And people are willing to have the conversation that, well, one might work for you. You might need the Mediterranean diet, and you might need keto, and you might need no sugar, and you might need a low fat diet, and you might need just calorie restrictions and extra exercise. You might need strength training. You might need cardio. But what they're not recognizing is that the reason why we all need something different is because our bodies are built differently, and there's a biology that goes on in there. And that's the conversation that's starting. And that's the piece that kind of woke me up and said, oh my goodness, all this time I've blamed myself for having, not having the strength to be able to do it on my own. And I don't change what I say now. I still say I couldn't do it on my own, but I honestly believe that it didn't matter what I was doing. I needed the surgery because the way my body was built, it was not going to come off.
Yeah,
and so I just wanted to clarify that.
And I appreciate the clarification, because at the end of the day, there's no one size fits all for really anything, even personal development. That's why there's so many people out there that person might not fit you, right? It's just, there's a synergy, there's a chemistry. And those listening, if you're thinking of trying any of those nutritional diets, it might not work for you.
Yeah.
Right. You can go and get testing. There's testing that'll say that this will work better for you. This is, like you said, your family's more of the back in the whatever age it happened within your DNA structure, hunter-gatherer, right? Hunter-gatherer, You're not getting a lot of food. So your body your generations learns to store it, right? It is what it is. At the end of the day, get out of your comfort zone, try something.
Figure it out.
Figure it out. And guess what? If you fall down and skin your knee, put a Band-Aid on and try something different.
Yes, please.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, more of that. Yeah, never stop. And that's about all aspects of life. So I want to go on to, you're a big believer in core values, being a great compass in your life and leading to, more often than not, the correct path. I know for myself, that's been, outside influences are attempting to distract me. And without my core values, it's easy to get back on the hamster wheel. It's easy to allow that outside influence to stall me, my decision to stall me, but it still happens. So my core values are an anchor to keeping the outside distraction and noise out.
Yeah.
So, my listeners have heard me speak of core values so many times and how they've impacted me in a positive way. But I have new listeners and viewers that come on board all the time. So could you please explain your take on what core values are and why they are so important to our daily lives?
Yeah, I love the way you distinguish between the outside and the inside, because right now the conversation around core values is very business and outside oriented. So it is things that we decide to value. I don't believe we decide on our core values. I think they're knitted into us at the very beginning. They were born with them. And so anytime somebody says, "Well, I've decided my values are this," well, that's nice. Those are things you value. Those are principles. Those are goals. But anytime we talk about core values, we're talking about the principles and the priorities that kind of guide your own personal actions. Use the word compass. They represent the foundational convictions that allow you to navigate life's ups, downs, fears, tragedies, all of that, while still keeping your own identity and authority at the forefront. And when we start talking about personal authority, people get really uncomfortable, and especially in the faith community. But that's what we need. And when we understand our own core values, then we actually have the authority to lead, to set boundaries, to do what we need to do, to act or lead with conviction and passion, things that we're passionate about, and to have the confidence to be ourselves and do that. So I'm interested in helping people kind of leave behind trying to imitate other people's principles and what are principles and priorities, and act within your own, define your own, figure out who you are. Because I have a coach that says, "Is that sustainable?" Almost every time we talk about doing something, she's like, "Is that sustainable?" And so I say, I like to offer people this ability to have sustainable, impactful leadership, because at the end of the day, we all want to impact our world. Even people who say, "No, no, I am going to stay in the background." You can't convince me that we don't want to have some kind of impact. If you're a parent, you want to have an impact. If you're a friend, you want to have an impact. If you have any kind of, God forbid, you have any kind of passion project or any kind of like a nonprofit that you're passionate about, understanding your core values will give you the ability to do all of that more authentically and better.
Yeah. And for those listening, you'll hear gurus or people that coach that say, these are the core values you need to follow. That's outside. That's why I was
Right.
talking about inside. You need to figure out your own core values. People will say to me that I coach, well, should I have 3, 5, 8, 12? I don't know. How many do you
I don't
think
know.
you
How many do you
need?
have? Yeah.
Yeah. How many do you think you need to stay checked in? And how many of those core values that we break down are subsets of a
Yep.
main core value? So like, myself, I have a few main core values and I have subsets of them.
Yep.
And do I need to explain them to people? No, they're my core values. I can
Not
talk to you
really.
about, I can have a conversation with you about them, but I don't, well, people will say, why do you have this one? And I'll go, well, why do you think? Right? I'll ask them a question back. Why do you think I have that? And you'd be shocked how many people will go, well, if I had that as a core value, it would be this, this, this. Oh, great. Okay. So there's one of your core values, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Make people,
Or
we're there to challenge people to think beyond their capabilities. Their 6 inches between their ears is so special and so unique to
yeah.
them that
Yeah.
nobody's ever told them you're unique. Let's
Yes.
work on what your brain is screaming at you, and you haven't been listening very well.
Well, none of us have. And like I alluded to this at the very beginning, or when I was talking about my origin story of this idea that my core values had kind of been dishonored. And, I don't want to have my core values dishonored, but the reality is I actually became the biggest perpetrator of that. I actually became the one who was allowing those things to happen. And when I look back, little things like talking about my relationship with my mother being complicated, she would say things like, "What do you think about," or no, she wouldn't even say that. Sorry, I say, "Don't you love this picture? Right? Isn't this pretty?" And my core value of, I want to think for myself, immediately raised its head and was like, "What do you mean? Don't I think that? What if I do think that? What if I don't think that?" And it was just this terrible back and forth in my brain. And I could never say it to her. I mean, I just also just told you how creative she was and how thoughtful she was and how sweet she was and how she wanted to make things better. And so here's this woman who wants to make things better. And all she's asking is if I like her picture or not. And I was frozen and I couldn't answer the question until now, learning, finally figuring out what my core values are. I look back and I think, oh, it's because that was a no-win situation for me. If I said what I really thought, and Every once in a while, when I was feeling a little cantankerous or not so special or not so nice, I'd tell her what I thought. Actually, I don't like it. What do you mean you don't like it? Because her core value was probably along the lines of agreement or consensus or something. It's like or shared joy. I mean, she loved doing that. And for me, my husband even had to learn to not say things like, "Wouldn't you agree that?" And then just it's like, well, okay, can we change the way we approach that? Because we shared earlier before we started recording, this month, I'll be married 29 years. So we're doing something right. And one of them is, he now says to me, "What do you think about this?" Right? Which gives me the opportunity to think for myself and to share. And when I work with people on this, I call them primary and secondary core values. You might call them subsets, but a lot of times we'll start with a brain dump and we'll get them down to like our top 15 or 20, and then we'll get them down to the top 10. And many times those top 10, and this is where your subsets come in, will be several that will fall in under 3 or 4, and they'll be the definitions. And I let people make their own definition. I say, start with a definition from Google, but then use, if, say, respect falls under thinking for myself, then what does that mean? I need you to respect my thought process, right? And that's part of the definition of my core value. But part of the exercise we walk through, Dwight, is always making sure we learn how to integrate those and how to honor them on a regular basis. And it is shocking to people how much they are the ones who dishonor their own core values rather than other people, because we've not been taught how to set good internal boundaries. And once we can learn how to do that, you're right, we don't have to tell people. It's like, I have 3/4 of an acre. I'm blessed. But I live on a road in the country it's 45 miles an hour. I moved in here with a 2-year-old, so I planted forsythia bushes right up on the road. Well, I neglected to think about how big those forsythia bushes would grow. And so I have to trim them with cars whizzing by. But I also have people walk inside those bushes that's my property, right? So that would be like my secondary core values. I allow them to just walk through. I want them to be safe. It's okay for them to quote unquote come inside my boundary. Nobody walks up to my front door and just walks in. They just don't. No stranger, not even my friends. My dad wouldn't even do that. They knock on the door. That's like my primary core values. That's the ones that when people can see that the house has a shut door, they know it is the way we are built, and we know that we automatically knock on someone's front door. Then it's the person's prerogative on the inside to open it or not, right? So I help people understand that my core values are like that. My primary core values have a shut door, and I get to decide whether or not somebody comes in or not. And I don't need it takes away the defensiveness. It takes away that need to like, my core value is thinking for myself, and you can't tell me to do that. That sounds like a 2-year-old, right? Or my core value is respect, and you're not respecting me. It's like,
Yeah. I've had to learn tools though when people get too intrusive about anything to do with my life. And I've taught my kids since they're all adults now. And some people get offended by it, but I'll just look at people and go, and I'll say it with very sincerity, and I'll calm myself down and go, "That's a great question. Why do you ask?"
yes.
And I make them defend why they even asked me.
Yes.
And I just was curious. Oh, that's awesome that you're curious. Oh, by the way, and I've learned how to deflect to protect me because I'm worthy. Right. So
you've figured out ways to honor your own core values and teach those around you to do it with what I call grace or competence or, grace is just the best word. I like to be gracious to others. I tell my clients, your core values are not a 2x4 that you walk around banging people on the head with. You just don't do that. They need to have, because they don't know. We don't know what we don't know when we don't know it. But once we do, then we're responsible. And as we kind of teach others in a careful and gracious manner, in a way that honors who they are, because if you have a core value, it's reciprocal. I don't only want myself to think for myself. I want you to be able to think for yourself. My third one is belonging. I don't want me to be the only one who feels like I belong. I want you to feel like you belong. And just the simple fact that you told me you were bullied as a child, it's like immediately my body was like, no, because that's how ingrained it is in me, right? It's like I become the protector. Even if I don't want to hear your story, it's so ingrained in me. Like even if my brain says, you don't have time for this, the rest of me is like, no, this is they need to belong too, right? Who's gonna give this person belonging, Andrea, if you don't? That's how you know it's a core value. If it's something that you cannot let go of, if it's a non-negotiable, if it's the things that you reciprocate on, because if it's just want respect for yourself, that's narcissism, right? It's like that's if you only want it one-sided, that's not good. So that's what I love working with people in that area, and I find that every day I figure out a new way that they are honored in my life or dishonored in my life or figuring things out, and more stuff makes sense.
So I like what when you talk about core values, myself, I found us out years ago, and it was actually a lady I met at a conference for speakers, authors, and coaches. And she's been on my show twice, and she discovered something that I thought, but never really realized, that I'm an empath. And she actually coaches empaths. I've had calls with her. I've met her personally in the US, and we've sat and had conversations about it, and realized one day I had this light bulb moment that my core values were directly ingrained with the fact that I'm an empath. I'm not saying that's for everybody. So when you talked about the fact that I was bullied, it's a good thing to be an empath, and it's also a bad thing because now I'm a giant antenna to pick up everybody else's what they're throwing down emotionally, mentally, right? Especially try having 4 daughters out of my 5 kids. That's why for the people watching that are new, I'm bald. There's a reason. All those years of smack in my head. But anyway, so core values for me have been very much key. And, having subsets or primary, secondary core values, it's been a game changer and a life changer for myself, because it's rules and people that, you can do core values and they become, for me anyway, they became habitual in my mindset. We think on a very fast pace. Our brain is a giant computer. It gets to a point that, it's a program that's constantly running. I can wake up in the middle of the night and have a negative thought and my core values kick in. Is this serving me? Right? Is this right? Somebody will say something to me, right? As an empath, I feel for them, but my core values have become integrated within them so that I say and act and do. Maybe I don't say anything. Maybe it's just listen mode. Maybe I need to be in just listen mode. And my opinion doesn't need to be shared. Maybe it's just nodding my head, having that kind gesture, maybe that hug, right? That half hug or touching somebody, or just when they're done speaking, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. And having the ability to be present without talking, and then knowing when to talk. And everybody listening, you may think this sounds complicated. It's not. I'm just saying this is where I've evolved to. This is a lifelong journey since I've discovered how to do core values that work for me. I don't walk around with a t-shirt that says, this is Dwight's core values. Nope. Watch out. I don't do that. There's not exclamation marks. I literally live my core values for me. I coach other people how to do it. I help them integrate them into their lives. I teach them about gratefulness and gratitude, similar to what you do too, Andrea. And at the end of the day, I need to understand that it's okay to have rules that I place on myself.
Yeah.
And that's what core values are for me. But then it becomes so much more than rules. It becomes integrated and interwoven within the fabric of who Dwight is. And it makes me proud.
Well, and I call them, when I first started talking about them, and I do talk about what mine are because I talk so much on podcasts about core values, and I need to give examples. But when I first started talking about them, I called them guardrails. Kind of like my son, when he was young, he liked bowling. And so we would put the bumper guards in, what do they call it? The gutter guards.
Yes, gutter guards, yeah.
And so I said, or they're like guardrails on the side of the road. I mean, they're things that keep us on the road. They're a compass that keep us on the road. I've also used the concept of being a filter. And I think that's kind of what you're describing, is like you're allowing your core values to filter, because I was told that I was an empath, and it didn't even occur to me. And I walked in, and a friend or somebody at a business said, "I love to watch you read a room." I'm like, "What?" And she said, "I just love to watch you read a room. You always know what's going on, I bet." And she said, "And you react differently depending on who's in the room." And I'm like, "I do?" And she's like, "Oh, yeah, it's really evident." So then I started looking at it. And I think just like you, my core values show up in that same way. And I've learned to read my body and realize sometimes, just like you, I need to let things go. And sometimes I need to say something or do something. But giving myself the permission to say, well, how would this serve me and how would this serve them? That's hard to like if you're an empath, if you want to help everybody. But in talking to the listeners, though, your core values may not have anything to do with being an empath. I layer them with the DISC information as well. And people who are more process oriented are probably going to have core values that are less people oriented, right? Mine are a little more people oriented, belonging and that kind of stuff, because I am on the side of the DISC spectrum, or it just happens to be that I'm very outgoing and very people oriented. So who we are as a person, it all layers together, and it all makes sense when you start looking. You're not going to find out shockingly that you have this weird core value that doesn't make any sense in the rest of your life. You're going to find out it's literally what you've been looking at the whole time, and you had no idea you're staring at it.
Yeah, and those epiphanies, those light bulb moments, those whatever people want to call them, it if you sit and reflect on it once it happens and you actually have somebody you can talk to about it, that's either been through it or going through it, or even if they haven't gone through it, just talking it out loud. Wow. It's just like the energy you feel off of it, that warm, fuzzy feeling is amazing. I know every time I discover even, and I turned 57 this year, just for your knowledge. So at the end of the day, every time I continue to learn something new about myself and evolve, I literally, it's just like, wow. Everybody that says an old dog can't learn new tricks, give me a break. You can
So
evolve.
wrong.
I have people that listen to my show. They're according to the analytics that are in their 70s, right?
Yay. Yes.
They must be one of evolving and changing, right?
I interviewed a guy the other day who's 82.
Yeah. So I want to keep on evolving and changing till the day I take my last breath. And before I take that last breath, it's going to be a comment or something. I'm not going to be that boo-hoo woo-hoo. It's going to be, wow, I lived a purposeful life. It's not going to be, oh, I only lived purposeful for 25 or 30 years of my life. Look at the tragedy I lived prior to that. That's garbage. Right? That's all in the past. That was all a stepping stone to the evolution of who Dwight is today. And now I'm on my deathbed and right to my last breath. I've even told my kids, you aren't going to hear me go, oh, I wish I'm not going to die. I'm a faith-bearing person. I believe in God. I believe there is an afterlife, that there is heaven. Oh, you see, kids, I'm going on to the next journey of my life. Right? I'm going to the next place. I'm going to go make a difference somewhere else now. Love you. Thanks for being there. Right? People will say, well, that's kind of stupid. Blah, blah, blah. You do you. I'll do me.
Right.
Right.
You do, boo. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to also communicate with you about is you speak of intentional optimism, and I've developed a signature tool to help others. Could you please speak more in detail as to what intentional optimism is and what can one expect from the resource you develop to help others?
Yeah. When we start with personal growth, we start kind of on the outside and work in. And if you're like me, you started with behavioral things and you worked your way in. And I started, we're basically the same age. I started at 19 with some of these things. But it wasn't until I hit 50 that I really, in earnest, said exactly what you just said. I lost my mother. I watched her die. She died well. She died at the very end, she was in hospice. So she had a little time and she wanted to make sure that she'd said everything she needed to say. Is there anything else you need to hear? Right. It's like, but she lived a very purposeful life. She tried to do everything that she could, but we all make mistakes, and she tried to rectify any of them that she had made. My son was only 8 when we lost her. The Sunday night before she died on Tuesday or Thursday, she was on the floor playing with him. And she would get knee to knee with me and just ask me. But watching her do that told me, or kind of woke up in me, I'm on the bus, or I'm on the wagon here, as you say, and I don't want to be. I want to make sure. And, we think we're growing in certain areas and we're doing little bits here and a little bit there, but that was in earnest when it really, really started. And so as I kind of sat through the grief of losing my mother, it was a little bit of a crucible. I said, what do I want to stand for? Because this is a different aspect. Core values are who we are, but how do I want to show up in the world? And so I just kind of brain dumped everything and pulled it all under columns, kind of the same process I did with core values, and realized I had about 6 categories of how I wanted to live. And I ended up calling it a personal growth lifestyle. And that's where I started. I mean, I'm a Maxwell leadership team certified DISC consultant, speaker, trainer, coach. But in the same moment, I was working on this myself. And so when I say it's the attitudes and mindsets we embody and employ to live out our values and our goals and dreams with excellence, it literally is that. And so it's 6 main tenets. And I start with core values with people. Sometimes I start with DISC and work back to core values, because some people need something very concrete, very easy and decipherable. And then the last thing we work on is living that out. And that's how we do that with Grace. But I say that they are, and I still have to work on these on a regular basis. There are some that come very naturally to me and some that I have to work on. The 6 tenets are bookended by, my business is called The Intentional Optimist. So they're bookended by optimism and intentionality. But the first one is optimistic. And this includes this is most assuredly not toxic optimism. This is not just everything is fine. This is hope, right? That hope is different from sunny optimism. This means that I have a confidence and I am willing to be positive about things, and I'm willing to be proactive. So I'm optimistic and I share that hope with others. Number 2, the second one is being present, which is more than just being where our feet are, as Bob Goff says. It's having this sense of wonder and being generous with my time and my energy, and letting my son interrupt me, being kind and being open. I like to tell people I try to have an open arm stance, and, kind of like the statue at Rio de Janeiro, the Jesus statue. But when we do this, Dwight, we are kind of making ourselves vulnerable to anybody else. We are saying, you're welcome here, yes, but at the same time, I'm being willing to be kind and open and generous. So I'm not going to attack you because I'm in this position, right? This is not how we attack. So being present is much more than that. And it's experiencing wonder. It's beautiful. The third is energetic. My mother was like a bottle of champagne, and you could just pop the cork and the bubbles came out, and she would need to recharge, but she entered the room and it was a bit like having Norm from Cheers enter. It was, everybody said, Judy, she would come in. And sweet story, my niece just had her second baby on Sunday of this week, and she named her after my mother. And so that's just really sweet to kind of see that kind of perpetuated in the family. But energetic means having an attitude of industry, always looking for that next best thing, always looking for how can I make myself better? It's being willing to be life focused. What brings me life? You just said that's garbage. It's in the past, right? So yes, we need to reflect and we need to see, but we need to be forward focused. Let our excitement happen. Experience things, enjoy the moment, let our joy bubble over, and let other people have that as well, because it can be very contagious, right? My mother would say, hi. And we would all just kind of go, hi. I mean, she just kept hard not to respond that way. It was like this bubbliness. The fourth one is courageous. And this is where leadership comes in. This is, it's like somebody's got to be willing to be the lead goose in the pack, flying in formation. It's a sense of adventure. Before we had GPS, we had MapQuest. Before we had that, we had like maps, and my husband and I, neither one of us are great. It's like, if we can't follow the instructions on the GPS, it's like, oh, we're on an adventure now. And just being willing to put that positive spin on it. But it also includes that skinning of your knee and getting up and being resilient. When you can do that, that's going to build courage in you. It's like a muscle, and it's going to give you the ability to do so much more. The fifth one is wise, having wisdom. And I think this one was the hardest for me to embrace, that I actually do have this. When people would come to my office, doctors, researchers, administrative assistants, clinical trial people, and sit down and talk to me, it always just kind of baffled me. Like, why are you coming to talk to me? And it was because they were getting wise counsel. And it's just, sometimes we have wisdom we don't realize we have, and that falls under the category of we don't give ourselves enough credit. When we've been around the sun enough times, there's certain things we learned, there's certain things we experienced. But it's more than just being able to give wise counsel. It means I'm willing to understand first you and then be understood. It's like you come first. It means my words are careful, and I want to speak with respect and make sure that I foster that in my environment. So that one is the hardest for me to grasp onto, because I just have a hard time thinking of myself as wise, because I'm always kind of like flip. But the last one wraps it all up and is the most natural for me, and that's intentional. And that's having this sense of purpose. It's having a plan, being willing to always grow, and being willing to say, I'm going to do all of these other things with a sense of intention. And I was talking with a gentleman on a mindfulness podcast. He's like, what do you think of as mindfulness? I'm like, I do everything with intention. I think about it. I pay attention to what's going on in my surroundings, and having that sense of purpose really makes a difference.
Yeah, I love the fact of, I wrote so much down here, like unbelievable. You talked about wisdom. And for me, people don't grasp and understand what wisdom is. And they'll say, well, I've gone through this in my life and I have this mistake and this mistake. Well, you know what? You need to rephrase that in your mindset. Well, what do you mean? Well, instead of saying I made a mistake, I had a life lesson happen. And if you tell yourself that, though, then you have to actually be intentional about the thought process of what did I learn from that? I had this life lesson, and what is this life lesson going to do for me short term and long term? Oh, it's going to create wisdom that I can impact and on other people to make a difference in their life. And that doesn't mean, those listening, that you need to be a coach. Maybe it's just that maybe you're just taking that wisdom and impacting it on your children. If you don't have children, maybe you're just impacting it on your significant other. But it literally also ties back to, I find the more wisdom to have, the stronger my core values become, the more purposeful my life becomes. And it's all tied together.
Yes, it
and
all feeds together.
Yes, it's all a circle of life, people.
Yeah.
But you know what? At the end of my life, I am hopeful.
Yeah.
And people get kind of, what do you mean you don't want the music to die inside of you? What do you play? And no, I don't mean that kind of music. The music of my life, the song that I sing, the things that I share, I don't want that to die inside of me.
Right.
So I intentionally, so back to your number 6, I intentionally work on my wisdom, and I work on my wisdom by making sure I don't have mistakes, that I have life lessons that I learn from, that are continually going to help me impact others in a more purposeful way. Hence why I wrote a book about it. Right. And for those that are new to the show, my book starts out at my origin, just like my podcast. My book is like my podcast, starts at my origin, what I went through, how I evolved through personal development, how I learned how to goal set and the process of doing it, how I learned how to take control of my finance so that I didn't live a life of quiet desperation. And the list goes on. But it's all about that number 6 you talk about. That was intentional. It impacting and making sure that, like you talk about core value, DISC, you're energetic, you're courageous, you're wisdom, just all that is amazing. Congratulations on putting that all together and going out and changing people's lives. That's awesome.
It's a privilege. Yeah, it's a privilege.
I like that. It is a privilege, isn't it? Isn't it a privilege to make a person smile? Or a privilege to make people feel good about themselves? That is a privilege, and we need to feed off of that. And it continues to make it so that we get to the next moment of our lives.
Yeah. And it is a privilege to watch somebody for the first time recognize their value, recognize that they have purpose, and they may not have thought they did. And, to your listeners, no, you don't need to be a coach. But I mean, you heard me say people would come into my office I was not a coach. I was just a manager. This is long before I did any of that. I had no idea. People would, before I even had an office, people would stop by my desk because there are some pieces of this intentional optimism that I was already living. And there are ways in which I wasn't always honoring my core values, but there are ways in which my core values were shining through. People can see that in you when you're willing to be honest, when you're willing to be authentic and be you. Like you said, those 6 inches between your ears. You're so unique. You're so different. You're so special. And you have that to offer. And if you don't offer it, we're going to miss out on whatever you were supposed to bring to the table. So having that ability, you don't have to be a coach. You don't have to be, a teacher. And the first person we lead is ourselves. So that's where you start.
Yeah. And it is the first person we lead is ourselves. And if you have those fall down, Band-Aid, boo-boo moments, the biggest thing that you can do is practice the intentionality of not being stuck to moving forward. And forgiveness is real. Anybody watching or listening, you need to forgive yourself if something happens and you climb into that rabbit hole for a moment, a day, a week. Guess what? That's okay. But what's not okay is letting it de-evolve you back to a place where you feel unworthy, because we all have challenges, character building moments. We all are not defined by them, though. What we are, though, is people that can look at them, be intentional, be purposeful, and learn from them and move forward and create more wisdom because of it. Because now we have a story we can share with somebody and say, Andrea, I hear what you're saying. This is what I've discovered. This is what I've gone through, and this is what I learned. This is how I dealt with it. Maybe it needs to be more detailed when you get into the details of how you dealt with it. Maybe it's just a simple comment that just reassures and makes that person feel calm, because being calm is something that we need to practice too, because it's so easy for us within the first 45 seconds to a minute of experiencing something that feels anxiety with us, to de-evolve, to be able to program ourselves to not get triggered, right?
Yeah.
Do I sometimes still get triggered and want to throat chop people? Absolutely. I'm not perfect, but I learn from it, right? I just continually move on.
Absolutely.
So you coach on a process of deconstruction. Can you please explain this process and why it's so important?
That's a whole other podcast. I'm just gonna be honest with you.
Okay.
I will say
that's a good answer.
I will say that my core value of thinking for myself, for autonomy of thought, makes me a very natural critical thinker. So I'm a very natural deconstructionist. I was never comfortable with that. I denied that. I always wanted the authority to come from outside of me. I was never comfortable with my own wisdom. So when I say deconstruction, I don't mean destruction. I mean deconstruct. Let your brain, actually your core values, filter what comes into you. Think critically about things. Ask yourself, is this true? Ask yourself where that came from. Ask yourself why you're letting someone else tell you what to do or what to think or how to believe, especially about something. And that gives you the ability to say, all right, I can take that. I can break it down. Am I going to believe it? These are the bits and pieces of it. No, I don't need that part. I'm going to move over here. And so I talk about a deconstruction, reconstruction process, but I don't espouse destroying. I don't destruct things. I deconstruct in order to put them back together. So that's part of the core values process as well, is being willing to think critically about things. And when I say that, I want to help people think critically, create imaginatively, and lead effectively because of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. We're definitely, if you're into it, going to have a second part 2. We're going to have to, because I'm looking at all the other things I wanted to talk to you about. and I never know, though, when I ask somebody, if I have to pull an answer out of them or if we can actually have a great conversation. Not everybody is designed to be able to share in a concise, thoughtful way where people can actually go, wow, that was a lot in that few sentences, right?
Thank you.
Some people just, they can write a 600-page book and still not get to the point, right? It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little critical. I don't know. But so Andrea, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Give a heck about, like I said it just a minute ago, think for yourself. It's okay to think for yourself. Please do so. Please allow your own brilliance to shine through and don't take everybody else's word for everything, because what you've been given, you need to give a heck about yourself and how you've been designed, because it's beautiful. Again, if you don't bring it to the table, we'll miss out on it. It's like having a really great holiday dinner missing the main course. And we need that from you. So please do that. Give yourself the benefit of discovering who you are and how you're wired so that the rest of us can have the benefit of you.
Well, thank you so much. That's a great closing message. And, thank you. I want to thank you for such a great show and giving me extra time. Those listening to the show, some of my shows will go an hour and 10, hour and 15. This one's gone a little bit longer. And I know I so appreciate the fact that you've invested time that you'll never get back. But what you will get back is my appreciation, my gratitude for you giving such, great, valuable advice to my listeners. And I look forward to us having another conversation in the very near future. So I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way they can reach you?
Yeah, I will tell you that, but I'm also going to point out that it is an investment of time, and you're a financial dude, so you know what investment means. So this, even just having these conversations, is an investment in me. So thank you very much for having me. So you can reach me. I'm at The Intentional Optimist. You can reach me at theintentionaloptimist.com. If you're on LinkedIn or Instagram and you want to DM me and tell me you heard me on Give a Heck, I am happy to respond to you. I will know that you're not spamming me, and I will respond to all of that. If you're interested in any things I've talked about, if you want to know about intentional optimism, you should be able to Google what is intentional optimism, and it may come up a landing page that will give you just a download with all 6 of them. If not, email me or DM me and I'll just shoot you a copy. But if you want to start on your core values, if you go to my website, right above my head is a button and it says free core values exercise. That's a 1-pager that will get you started on the process, and it'll let you know if you need extra help in other areas, how you can get it.
Fantastic. And for those new to the show, go to giveaheck.com and click on the podcast tab, and you will see a picture of Andrea. And below that will be abbreviated show notes with everything she just discussed and how you can reach out to her social media links. And it'll be a one-stop shop for you to be able to access and not have to remember, because many people listen to the podcast, they're driving their vehicle, they're jogging, they're on a treadmill, whatever the case may be. Those of you that are watching, it's just go to the website, make it easy on yourself. You owe it to yourself to access the information that she's spoken about. So any last closing comments before I wrap up my show?
I love giving a heck, and I think I think it's smart, and it resonates with me in the whole intentionality piece, because if we don't give a heck, then we're not intentional. We don't grow. If we don't make a plan, you plan to fail, right? So I think it's really smart and a great way to live.
Well, thank you. And it is a great way to live. And, I've been blessed with the name, so why not utilize it and live that kind of life? So thanks so much for being on and Give a Heck, Andrea. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.